More is effectiveness. hSenid, 15 years of empowering more.
Okay, we are here today to talk about talent management. Now, one of the most important points that all of you will no doubt have heard is that you can only manage something that you really understand deeply, all right? If you want to control something, you need to understand it deeply. So I would like to share with you some thoughts about this somehow mystical topic called HR analytics that is supposed to give you insights into everything, make you understand and monitor everything that you do. Now, fortunately, many of you have not heard me speak or present before, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I can be rather controversial sometimes when I present, so please forgive me in advance if I am. Be ready to cover your ears if I say something you don't like to hear. But I think it would be a good thing to do, to stimulate you first thing in the morning by throwing one or two provocative thoughts there, all right? Analytics is something that sometimes it reminds me of when I was a boy and I was talking to my childhood friends about girls, you know? We were all talking about it, but not many of us had actually done anything about it. And those of us who had were not doing it very well, all right? So analytics is a bit like that. There are lots of misconceptions about analytics. So what I would like to do today is to cover some fundamentals and to share with you how can analytics really help you to get a grip, to get an understanding about what's happening in your organization. I would like to share with you what analytics is, what analytics is not, and most importantly, what can you do right now, not 5 years from now, what can you do right now to actually start your journey into HR analytics, right? I'll give you some examples specific to retention. I could give you examples about a wide range of applications of analytics. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, by 10 o'clock today, you will have at least some clarity or at least a point of view regarding what analytics is and what you could do with it. Let's start from some fundamentals, right? I would like to share with you that workforce analytics is actually what we define as a journey, and it's also a process. I would also like to share with you that analytics is actually quite different or can be different from metrics. There is some degree of confusion. Sometimes it's a matter of terminology, it's a matter of semantics. So let's try and figure out what is the difference between HR metrics and HR analytics. I will also like to present to you organizations as systems. Systems in the physical sense, in the sense of being composed, being made up of many different parts that move almost independently, but as they move independently, they influence and affect each other. And the sooner you realize that your organization is a complex system, the more you will appreciate the importance of advanced analytics. And finally, I would like to make a technical point about two different techniques which are very important into analytics. One is called deductive and the other one is called inductive. So let's start from that. You know, I define analytics as a journey. Some companies actually don't do anything with their data, with their information. They basically just function. Fortunately, not many companies do that. There are companies out there, mainly small organizations with a small number of people who don't really see the need to analyze what's happening or what they're doing because it's not complex enough. But as companies grow and become slightly more complex in the way they operate, they typically find a need to do some ad hoc analysis, to stop once in a while to understand what's happening. Why are certain things going on? You know, how much money did we make last month? How many people do we employ? How much are they costing us? And so on. As companies become more sophisticated, they move into the next stage of sophistication where those kind of reports, those type of analysis are done on a regular basis. They recognize that you need to see the trends. You are not just interested in a spot check or in a snapshot of what's happening at any particular point in time. You may want to see whether the trend is going in the right direction. So you do regular reports. But by doing those regular reports, you are actually making some assumptions that you know exactly what you need to measure and what you need to report on, right? So those reports are ultimately based on some assumptions as to what is important to monitor. The next phase is when things start to get a bit more interesting, because in addition to periodic reports, you use that data, you use that information to start testing some hypotheses. You start reading things into those reports, into that information. You start thinking, I think there is a correlation between perhaps how much money we spend on training and our turnover rate. Maybe there is a correlation between the performance rating of the supervisor and the performance rating of the employee who reports to that supervisor. Maybe, all right? So you start using that data to try and understand really what's going on. How are all these different things related to each other? The most advanced phase of analytics, the most advanced stage, is where you can actually move towards what is called predictive modeling. If you have figured out with a certain degree of certainty and accuracy how all these variables affect each other, you can actually start doing simulation scenarios. You can start to predict or anticipate what would happen if we were to change one of these variables. How will the situation change if we were to spend more on training, or increase our salaries, or decrease our salaries? You can actually move into predictive modeling, which enables you to make better informed decisions, all right? So analytics is a journey. You don't need to be advanced today. You just need to understand what is appropriate for you at this point in your history, in the history and evolution of your organization. What's appropriate for you? What are your needs, right? And then start doing something about it. Clearly, as you move along these levels of maturity and sophistication, the value that you derive from your data increases, right? And the value that your business derives from data increases. I will share with you later that you can actually start on that journey right now. The good thing about the journey is that it doesn't really matter where you start. What matters is where you want to go and how you're going to get there, which means anyone can start on that journey at any point in time. And that's what we do as consultants. That's what we do. We help organizations understand where they are and what they need to do to move to the next level. We also define analytics as a process. What do we mean by that? If you look at workforce analytics, for example, you need to have some idea of what are you trying to find out. What are the things that you are most interested in? Is it turnover? You want to understand why your employees are leaving? Okay, let's assume you have some critical questions. Then based on those questions, you need to start gathering some information. You gather some data, and you can gather data from all sorts of sources, right? Once you have gathered that information, you need to develop some understanding by looking deeply into that data to understand trends, correlations, meanings, insights, and based on those insights, you actually decide what to do next. And once you've taken some action, you can go around the cycle again by seeing how is that action that you're taking changing the situation. So it's an ongoing process of understanding, taking action, monitoring the effect of your action, and continue to go around the circle until you've actually addressed all the issues that you're facing, and you can actually see whether your strategies, your approaches, your tactics are working or not. Right? is this something different from what we already know? Actually, when you think about it, analytics has been around for centuries, okay? My grandmother used to do analytics, believe it or not, right? We've all done analytics before. Ask yourself, what is the definition of experience? What is the definition of wisdom, right? Sometimes, you know, my grandmother, my mother, or I'm sure a lot of our ancestors, they used to recognize something in situations. They used to say, look, I don't trust this guy. On what basis? Oh, why? Because they are picking up some pieces of data, they are correlating to something that they've experienced before, and they do those correlations in their mind. They say, if I see all these signs, if I pick up all these messages from a situation, that is something that I've seen before, I'm extrapolating this to the current situation, and I'm making a prediction of what's going to happen next, right? We've been doing it intuitively for a long time. The reason why analytics is a big thing now is that we can do it on massive amounts of data. Nowadays, we have the storage capacity. Storage has become very cheap. We have the processing power to process large amount of data, and that's why it's become a big thing. But we have been doing it in our head for a long time. Auditors used to do that for a long time. They take a sample because they just don't have time or the space or the capacity to do an analysis on a whole set of data. They take samples and they assume that those samples are representative of the whole organization, and they try and read something in those samples, and then they generalize. They assume that whatever they find in those samples applies to the whole organization. Nowadays, you can do analytics on every single piece of data available to the organization, right? So this is not something new. When you go to your doctor with a critical question. Hey, doctor, I'm not feeling well. I have a pain there. The doctor will gather some facts. The doctor will do some analytics on you. Will understand what's going on. Will give you some actions. Take this medicine. Go to hospital. Rest. Take Panadol, whatever. And then he checks how you're doing. Are you doing okay? If not, let's go around the cycle again. All right? So the concept is nothing new. Now, let me tell you something. There is a difference between metrics, dashboards, and analytics, right? If you're driving a car, you're looking at a dashboard that you're very familiar with, right? And this is very useful. Dashboards are very useful because they give you an instant understanding as to whether or not things are within normal parameters, right? But the dashboard doesn't tell you what's going on inside the car. When you look at your dashboard, you don't really see what's going on in there, right? Now, is it important for you to understand how every single part of the car is working? No, it isn't. If you're a driver. If you are a car mechanic, if your job is to fix cars or to build cars, yes, it is important. Now, let me ask you a question. If you're a HR practitioner, is it important for you how every single factor that affects your performance of your employees influences the performance? Is it important to understand every single factor that affects retention? Is it important for you as HR practitioners to understand every single factor that affects development, capabilities, your success in acquiring the best talent? Well, I think yes. I think it is important. So metrics are good. Metrics save you a lot of time, but you need to go deeper than that. And this is what analytics does. Analytics gives you that detailed view that dashboards just summarize, right? Let's go back to the analogy of the doctor. The thermometer is a dashboard, right? It gives you a number. That's what dashboards do. They give you a number. So if you take your temperature and it turns out to be, 36.7, hey, you're fine. If one day you take your temperature and you have, 40 degrees or 42 degrees, does the thermometer tell you what's wrong with you? No. Now, if you're a patient, you don't need to know, you don't need to understand. If you're a doctor, you are not just going to look at the thermometer. Would you go to a doctor who can only read the thermometer? No. You go to a doctor who can run a whole range of analytics on you. He will send you for blood tests, he will send you to do x-rays, he will do all sorts of samples to understand what's really happening inside. And from those insights, he or she will decide what to do and how to fix it. So that's the difference between HR metrics and HR analytics. HR analytics give you an understanding of the correlations, and most importantly, most important thing to understand is that HR analytics does not replace experience, right? It just helps you to do more with the experience you have by giving you more information. The more information you have, the more information, the better job you can do as a HR professional, right? So, in the same way as that, doctors today can do a much better job because they can send you for a CT scan, they can see exactly what's happening inside, and they can make better decisions, right? So organizations are systems. All these things, a car, the human body, an organization chart, a workflow chart, that's what they all have in common. They all have a lot of moving parts. They all have components that function independently, but the performance of the whole thing is affected by how well each one of the internal parts works. If any of the parts in your body stops working well, the whole system suffers. Your performance is affected. You try and run a marathon if you have a toothache. Do you run with your teeth? No. But that really affects your performance. All right? So this is why analytics is important, because those correlations are not obvious. Right? Those correlations and how everything contributes to performance, it's not obvious. And analytics help you to understand exactly where the problem is. What is affecting the outcome that you are measuring with your dashboard. Right? So it allows you to go very deep. I also wanted to give you a bit of a distinction between deductive versus inductive techniques. I have put myself a timer here to make sure that I don't overrun. Deductive versus inductive techniques. It sounds like a very technical thing, but I think it's an important distinction. Deductive techniques are effectively when you start from an assumption. So you have a theory, and the theory could be there is a relationship between number of training hours and employee retention. So the theory is that, so the hypothesis is, if we spend more in training our people, they're more likely to stay. So you start from that assumption, you start from that hypothesis, you create a metric around that, you measure it, and you find out whether that's true or not. And this is where all the HR metrics in the world come from. They all come from this kind of thinking. When people sit down and think of HR metrics, they assume that a correlation between two factors is meaningful. It tells you something, all right? And you need to validate it. And you may find it to be true or not. This is what dashboards are based on, all right? They try and assume what is important information that you should know and you should monitor, right? By contrast, inductive techniques start from zero assumptions, right? We don't know what's meaningful, what's not meaningful. We don't know what's important, what's not important. We don't want to make assumptions as to what's happening. Give us all the data. Let's look at all the data that you have. And let the data tell us what's going on. Let the data tell us where there are some correlations, where there are some relationships. Let the data tell us what factors is affecting other factors. What are the factors that are contributing to a certain outcome? We start from zero assumptions, and we use whatever information is available to us. We have done HR analytics projects at Deloitte, where we have looked at every single piece of information that was available to us, not just from the HR database. We have looked at financial databases, we have looked at customers' databases for the same project. We have looked at telephone logs. Who has been emailing to whom about what topics, what time of the day was it? We have looked at email correspondence. We have looked at what websites people have visited. A lot of that maybe has no meaning, but you don't know. And in fact, in some cases, you find some interesting information, right? I will share with you later on some of these projects actually give you some interesting information that you can use to retain your employees. And there are no dashboards in the world that can measure those things. Only analytics can. So effectively, with inductive approach, you start from all available data. You look at the data, you have a bottom-up approach, it's a data-driven approach, and you can actually understand and identify correlations, some of which were unpredictable. Right? We found, for example, for one client in the US, we found that actually the one single factor that contributed the most to turnover was the commuting distance. Right? It was a very special case, and no other company probably has the same problem. This was a specific company in a specific part of the US, in a specific industry, and we found after running all the analytics that the biggest contributing factor was how long people had to commute to work. Right? More often than not, you find there's more than one factor, and then you need to decide where do I want to target my action, all right? And so if you identify which factors have the biggest influence on your outcome, then you know where to spend your money. You know where do you want to focus your efforts, right? Now, a word of warning about inductive techniques. They can be very useful. They're useful because you are not trying to guess. They're useful because actually the data is telling you that there are some correlations over there that you need to look into. But again, you must be careful not to make assumptions. You must go back and test whatever correlations you find inductively, because correlation doesn't always mean that the two things there is a cause and effect relationship. Not always, right? I'm sure many of you here are familiar with statistics. There may be correlations sometimes that do not involve causality, right? A famous example is, in the 1940s and 50s in Europe, there was this disease called polio. It used to strike during the summer months. You look at it, during the summer months, all of a sudden the polio cases go up, and then they go down in the winter, go up, down in the winter. Now, if you were to map that trend against the consumption of ice cream in Europe, you'll find there is a perfect correlation. When people eat more ice cream, they get more polio. Is there a correlation between the two? No. Well, there is a correlation, but there is no causality, all right? One doesn't cause the other. Ice cream doesn't give you polio, okay? So, safe. So, let's have a look now. Having clarified a little bit what analytics is and what it isn't and how it differs from HR metrics, let me share with you some of the applications of analytics to HR. These are examples of projects that we have actually worked on. And basically what it's telling you is that you can use analytics on a wide range of applications when it comes to HR. We have done work in the workforce safety, using analytics. We can go into an organization, look at all the data that they have, and tell them what are the factors that contribute or are more likely to contribute to industrial accidents, or even accidents out of the office. There have been some court cases in Europe where employees have claimed that they had an accident on their way back home because they had worked too many hours, too many nights in the night shift, too many times in a row. So when they go back home, it's very dangerous for them to drive. So the accident is not happening at work, it's happening outside of the office, but employees could blame the company You're working me too hard. You're asking me to work too many nights in a row. And then when I go home, I may have an accident because I fall asleep. Can you prove that? We actually did an experiment. We actually did a project actually to look at what are the factors that cause industrial accidents. You know, how many shifts you have, how many hours you work, how much training you give people into safety, the supervisor, and all those kind of things. Everything that could possibly contribute to an accident needs to be identified. Because if you can prevent one accident, you save millions in reputation, in damage, in lawsuits, and so on. Right? We've done research and projects understanding how does diversity and inclusion translate into bottom line. Is there a relationship between having a diverse workforce and having a diverse composition of certain teams, or the board, or certain committees, and the performance of a team? You can actually do that. You can actually tell whether, you know, performance can be enhanced or not by having a more diverse workforce. We have looked at retention. I'll give you some examples about retention. We have looked at the staffing market, supply and demand of talent, what are likely to be the requirements for certain skills for the organization in the future, and what is going to be the future supply and demand of certain skills. We have looked at reasons for absenteeism. What are the factors that drive absenteeism? Are there patterns there that you need to be aware of? How can you minimize it? How much is it costing you? Is it happening in specific functions? Is it happening in specific teams? Is it happening at specific times of the year? Right? Is it happening in specific factories? You need to understand all that. Otherwise, you don't understand absenteeism as it relates to your organization. We have looked at workload issues. We have looked at networks and influence flow profiling. When I mentioned earlier about us collecting information as to any activity that goes on in the office, many companies now ask their employees to agree to being monitored on whatever they do on a computer within an organization. So companies nowadays have the right to go and dig out from the servers every email record ever sent or received, every web page visited. If employees are using social media during the office hours, it's fine. You know, we do. We actually have our own social media network, but it can be monitored, right? Now, what can you do with that information? Well, you can do a lot, actually. You know, I believe that in any organization, there is the organizational structure, and then there is the real organization, right? What I call the invisible organization. The invisible organization is the real organization. Who is really connected to whom? Who talks to whom? Who is leading whom? Who is influencing whom? If you don't understand the invisible organization to work in, it's going to be very difficult for you to manage your people. Now, this kind of network and influence analysis can actually give you some very good insights as to what are the groups within your organizations, how are they grouped? Are they grouped around specific interests, subject matters, specific cultures? Maybe they all came from the same office. What is it that keeps them together? Who is influencing whom? What are they interested in? What difficulties and challenges are they having? What do they think? And you know, you can gather so much information that enables you to make better decisions. If you know that someone is a strong influencer and this person resigns, you can have a pretty good idea of who is going to resign next and why. Now, don't you think that is important information to have? I think so, right? And this is not spying on our employees, by the way. There is an agreement up front. Every time I log into my computer, I'm reminded everything I do on this computer can be monitored, all right? At least I know. Okay. We can look at fraud. We can look at, you know, accidental. I don't know if there is such a thing as accidental fraud, but, you know, people who make mistakes during their expenses claims, for example, or timesheets. We can actually identify that because when you do inductive analysis, those anomalies pop up. They stand out like a sore thumb. We can look at health and productivity, optimization of your workforce. Are they organized properly? Do you have the right people in the right place? And all this information, can be useful at the enterprise level when you try and look at the organization as a whole to ensure that your organizational design and the people that you have and their performance, their skills, and what they are actually doing, what they're generating, the outcome, the KPIs, everything is aligned. Dinesh mentioned the alignment between talent management and the organizational objectives. How do you measure that? Well, you measure it really by looking at what everyone is doing and how they are organized within an organization, and are they actually contributing what they are supposed to contribute. And also, if we wanted to focus on the HR function itself, we could do the same thing. We could actually look at many aspects of how the HR function operates, the inputs, the output, the performance, the service levels, the number of mistakes made, who is making those mistakes, how long are they working when they're making those mistakes, what else are they dealing with, all those factors that can contribute to mistakes or service levels within HR, you need to understand that. Because once you understand them, you can manage them. This is just an example. It's far too small for you to read, certainly too small for me to read, but it's just an example of how different the analytics data is from traditional data. When you look at traditional HR data, you look at 3 employees, Larry, Mary, and Sue, and you look at how long have they been employed, what was their performance rating last year, all the kind of typical HR employee record. You can enhance that. You can actually add more information. When you look at these 3 individuals, you can look, when was the last time they were promoted, how many days of vacation did they take last year, do they manage to take vacation at all, or are they like me who never takes a vacation? How many hours do they work? What was their lowest performance, the highest performance rating? You can add a lot of information to each employee record that enriches what you typically capture. Now, I'm not suggesting that you capture all that in your database. What I'm suggesting is that you already have that information somewhere, most probably, right? Now, from that enriched data, enhanced data, you can actually derive some interesting insights. You can actually start predicting, for example, that Larry is 25% more likely to benefit from some executive coaching. You can predict that Mary is 40% more likely to leave the company within the next 12 months. You can start to do some predictive modeling on that. This is an oversimplified version, of course, of what we usually do. But the message here, the fundamental point I'm trying to make, is that if you do use all the data that you have, and if you manage to figure out how all these factors have contributed to specific outcomes in the past, you can actually start making some predictions. Very important point I need to make. We don't just use the past and extrapolate it to the future, by the way. It's a bit more complex than that. When we do analytics, we often also use external data. What is the unemployment rate today? Because that may have an impact. Okay, very high unemployment situation, people tend to just stick to their jobs, right? If there is an economic boom, people are more likely to leave the job. We can look at CPI, we can look at lots of external factors that also affect this. So the message here is that you can enrich the data that you have, you can supplement the data that you have in order to do analytics. Maybe some challenges to move forward? Nope. Maybe some challenges with this? Okay. All right. Let me just give you, just want to check, okay. Let me just give you some examples of retention analytics I probably need some help from back there to flick the slides, because, okay, right. So, I don't need to explain the importance of retention, okay, why is it important? What I would like to stress is, wouldn't it be nice if you were able to challenge the common way of doing things, if you were able to actually start to predict who is likely to lead the organization and why, you know, then you can make a decision. Because sometimes you may actually want to let these people go, but some other times you may not want to. So wouldn't that be nice to do? Would you do something different as a result? Basically, what we use techniques called, as I mentioned, predictive analytics to use internal data as well as some external data regarding, for example, demographics, economic indicators, to estimate the probability, and it's only a probability, of course, of certain individuals being more likely to leave the organization. Okay. The advantage of doing it this way is that, you know, by the time the employee sends you the resignation letter, is usually too late. There is a lot of emotions involved. The employee may have been unhappy for a long time. Maybe they've already spoken to their colleagues and told them, I'm resigning, so they don't want to lose face by saying, I'm staying after all. So, you know, there are lots of factors. So the way we actually do, we use external data, economic indicators like GDP, unemployment rates, cost of living index, sometimes even postcodes, every information that we can actually get hold of, as well as internal data from different systems, right? And sometimes we also use synthetic data. What does it mean? Some organizations have missing information, right? And we have algorithms and methodologies to actually make very well-educated guesses as to what the missing data is likely to be, right? Let me tell you, just as an aside, Deloitte has set up an analytics institute. We have the Analytics Institute, one in the US, one in Europe, and one in Singapore. The Analytics Institute is not only it has a consulting arm, but also has a research arm. The Analytics Institute employs statisticians, physicists, mathematicians, psychologists, and, you know, these kind of, you know, doctors, just to research this stuff. So this is not one person trying to come up with clever ideas. This is actually applied research, and people have written PhDs on this stuff, right? So it's actually well tested. There is a strong and solid methodology behind it. So we effectively we analyze all this information to understand what those correlations are. What are the factors that increase the likelihood of someone resigning? What are the factors that increase the likelihood of someone staying, right? And basically we come up with scores, because then when we measure how do those factors apply to specific individuals, we can come up with a score. For example, we run exactly the same thing on our own people. Deloitte came up with its own analytics on its own people. And we found that there were actually 10 top reasons why people leave Deloitte. Number of flights per week is a good indicator. How many people around a specific individual are star performers? Because, you know, we are all very ambitious guys, you know, we like to be top of the class. If there's too many clever people around us, then we think, okay, I better go somewhere else. How many hours we work a week, where people get hired from, how long they've been with the firm, their performance, promotion history, personal time off, you know, the number of vacation hours, how many nights a week do we spend away from home in a hotel, and the external unemployment rates. So these are just indicators. And then we basically developed a dashboard, right? This is just a visualization tool whereby, you know, we can actually break down to every individual across all the top reasons and come up with an index, a score, that tells us how likely is this employee to leave the firm. Is he or she at risk, or are they likely to stay, all right? So we have collected all the data. We have consolidated the data in the dashboard, and we now do the analysis as it relates to specific employees. Basically, as I mentioned, we use this kind of cyclic approach, right? The advantage of doing that is that we can then make decisions. If we identify an employee who is at risk, we can decide how much of an investment we want to make and where do we want to make that investment. For example, if there is a small risk, then maybe we make a small intervention. Sometimes a phone call from the supervisor, sometimes a dialogue, a word of encouragement, a word of recognition can go a long way. Sometimes you may actually need to spend a bit of money. You may call the employee and say, look, I know we haven't given you a lot of training because you've been busy. I would like you to take, next 2 weeks to go on this training program in the US, and, because you're very important and we recognize your potential, whatever. You may want to spend a bit of money. Or you may have to go really full blast, and you need to increase the annual salary, and you need to decide based on your situation, based on who is the employee, based on your judgment as to whether or not you want to retain them, and how much would you be prepared to do in order to retain them. You make the decision, right? Now, unless you understand what the likelihood is, as well as the performance of the employee, the contribution they are making to the organization, if you don't understand all those things, it's going to be difficult to make those decisions. Okay. So what we found is that using analytics, you can actually segment your population. You can actually identify which segments are at higher risk, and you can actually target those groups so that your money, whatever initiatives, whatever action you take, you spend money on those groups where it has the biggest effect, the biggest impact. All right. If you have those 3 groups of people representing a large percentage of the potential people who will potentially leave the company, then you may want to do something for those 3 groups. Because if you deal with those 3 groups, you've actually captured probably 80% or 70% of those people who may otherwise resign. And so the beauty of analytics is that you're just using the same set of data, and you can actually segment it, and you can drill down as deep as you want. You can be fairly superficial. You may want to look at the group of people. For example, all the managers who got promoted last year. Or you may want to look at specific demographic group. Let me look at, for example, all the guys, all our employees who are 35 and below, or all the employees who joined us less than 2 years ago. So you can actually identify trends that are specific to groups, and you can do analysis that are specific to groups, large groups, small groups, or even specific individuals, as we have seen. You can predict what is this particular individual going to do in the next 12 months. Okay. I can share with you a couple of other examples. For example, in the area of workforce planning, some organizations tell us, look, we have this big strategy, we want to grow, we want to expand into new markets, but this is what we're going to need in terms of people. Help us. Is it feasible? Do we have the people? Where are we going to find the people? And so on. So again, in these particular situations, we use internal sources of data, HR data, finance data, data from operations. We look at everything, including the sales pipelines. We need to understand whether this company has the capability, has the potential to grow, even if we were to give them the right people. Then we look at external data. We look at macroeconomic data. We look at industry-specific data. We look at labor markets in various parts of the world, as well as external benchmarks. There's my alarm telling me that I have to wrap up soon, just in time. Then we look at supply and demand. We look at what is the projected supply So if you have certain needs to hire a certain number of people with specific skills, how many of these people do you have internally who can be promoted? How many of those people that you have internally are likely to leave your company within the next few months because you have to discount those because they're not going to be there? And then what is the global demand for these people? What is your demand, but also what is the global demand? Who else is after the same employees, okay? Because that understanding of supply and demand will drive a lot of considerations, okay? You may not be the only one who is looking for those specific resources. You need to know who else is looking at the same individuals and what am I going to do to make sure that they come to me, all right? So this is where supply and demand always need to be seen in conjunction. And then we can help to simulate scenarios. If you take a specific action to be more successful at attracting people, what will happen? Would you succeed? You know, this is the predictive modeling that I mentioned earlier, right? Scenario planning. Scenario planning allows you to test and experiment with certain actions, certain interventions, and see what kind of an effect are they going to have on the final outcome, right? So this is a way to accelerate workforce planning. You know, create a model and see whether that's likely to work for your organization. We've done the same again for recruitment analytics. You know, many times recruitment is kind of guesswork, all right? I've seen companies that where, you know, the interview consists of 10, 15 people interviewing a candidate. At the end of this long process, they hire the person. 6 months later, this person is not the right person for the organization. It's not performing, you know. Then my view is, save yourself a lot of time. You might as well toss a coin, right? If it's head, we hire. If it's tails, we don't. Same, right? By understanding what is it that makes a person successful in your organization, what type of people succeed in your organization, what do they have that you do not find in those people who fail? What's the difference that makes the difference? Once you understand that, you can be a lot more targeted in your recruitment initiatives, right? And that's what we do. And we look at just not only the people, we look at the whole process, we look at the data that you capture, we look at the tools that you use, and so on, right? So again, I don't want to belabor this because we are out of time. I don't want to infringe on your coffee break. The final thing I would like to say is that analytics, in many organizations who have embraced analytics, it has become a culture, right? It has become a culture because once you understand the value that you can get out of analytics, you will want to do more and more. And in fact, what we advise companies is start small. Start with a pilot, just so that you understand the power of analytics. And those companies that have done that, they've actually got to the point where no decision is made unless it's backed up by facts and figures. What that means is that, you know, you don't make decisions simply because you're trying to find a compromise, or you make decisions because you don't want to offend certain people, or you make decisions because the big boss says so. You make decisions because the facts and the numbers tell you that's the right thing to do. And because you have played around with predictive models, with simulations, and you know that that particular action is more likely to give you the best results. So analytics can and should eventually become a culture. Now, the final point I would like to leave you with is a lot of clients tell me, look, you know, but we are not ready yet. We don't have the systems, we don't have the data, our data is not very good, it's fine, all right? Our view is, you know, we don't sell software, we don't sell hardware, so we have a totally unbiased view of this. And our view is, don't wait. Don't wait until you have every single bit of data clean and accurate. Don't wait until you have a big, you know, system, an enterprise resource planning system with, you know, like ERP, SAP or Oracle, PeopleSoft or whatever. Start where you are. It's a journey. Start small. Use whatever data you have. There are ways to help you to do something with whatever data you have, as long as you also have some ideas to what are your burning issues, what are your top priorities. That, you can actually do that. You can actually start where you are, and you can actually start delivering some information The visualization of the information is very important. We found that CEOs and CFOs, very busy people, they don't want to go through a 20 pages spreadsheet every month or every quarter. Just give me something visual, something that can immediately tell me, how are we doing? And that's very important. How do you visualize that information? Become a fact-driven culture and recognize the distinction between different analytics techniques and use the one that is best for you. If you need any help at all, if you need any assistance or any information, we are always happy to share free of charge whatever knowledge and information that we can contribute. There is a lot of information out there, but there is also a lot of misinformation out there. My mission is to demystify analytics, so I hope that today I've just been able to at least explain some of the fundamentals, dispel some of the myths around analytics, and I hope that from today you will be able to consider at least taking the first steps in your journey into analytics. I'll be around during the coffee break if you have any questions, but I'd like to thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
More is effectiveness. hSenid, 15 years of empowering more.